Welcome to this very portrait-focused sketchbook tour. It's the new year, so the perfect time to look back at my old sketchbooks and ahead to the future. What to improve and practice next. I found this little blank book years ago at a flea market, occasionally doodled in it, but one day in 2021 decided to turn it into a portrait practice sketchbook. It marked a turning point in my entire drawing journey. At that point, I'd just started getting into more realistic drawing after years of storyboard and design work, the occasional cute watercolor illustration, and a background in scientific visualization. As none of those fields focused in any way on portraiture, my clearest influence during these early sketches are probably manga, going way back to a decade ago when I drew comic and manga art. So I had this foundation starting out, and I think it's important to look at where you're coming from, what you're starting with. Your practice focus can look very different from what was right for me at that point. With that manga artist background, my portraits were focused heavily on line drawings. There's also a level of stylization that makes them more expressive, but in this sketchbook, I really wanted to practice more realistic drawing instead. I used a blue polychroma colored pencil in the very beginning. If I remember right, that was just what I had at hand, and I liked the softer look. I still love colored pencils now for sketches, as they force me to not rely on erasers and can add a fun touch to even a simple drawing. But nowadays, I prefer more muted shades that can give me a wider value range, so I can capture darker shadows. These early pages are quite a mess. I kept starting multiple sketches at once, flipping back and forth to finish them whenever I had time. It's why these first flip-through pages look like they're out of order. Here I started to bring in mixed media, colored pencil with regular graphite pencil, a combination that still lives on in all my sketchbooks today. I think this character portrait of Cassandra marked one shift, as I went from a line drawing focus to a plane focus. The planes of the face were a mystery to me then, but some references have the perfect amount of information to learn more. Cheekbones, sharp angles, a crisp lighting that emphasizes them. And I had so much fun with the shading here, with pencil strokes that followed the planes of the face. I kept exploring different cross-hatching and shading methods for the next few portraits. You might notice that quite a bit during this sketchbook tour, stumbling on a technique I like and then exploring it for multiple sketches in a row. On the timeline of this, I started this sketchbook in summer 2021. Sometimes I'd sketch multiple portraits in a single day, sometimes I wouldn't touch it for weeks. I didn't give myself any deadlines or concrete goals, I just wanted room to explore, practice and experiment without any pressure. Around this time I'd also taken a schoolism class, more on that in my artist Q&A video, and I think what I learned there reflected in my portrait sketchbook, focusing more on shapes over lines, shadow and light over neutral character drawing. This portrait here marked another gear shift in my portrait journey, blurry shadows. Our eyes perceive less detail in shadow, and I really tried to capture that here, blending all those shapes together. It's like my brain suddenly understood a new aspect of drawing, of how light and shadow works, and I got to unlock that with a sketch, and many following ones to practice. You might wonder about the references used here, as it's a pretty chaotic mixture. A lot of them are from Howard Lyon's reference photography sets. I didn't own more than a couple back then, so you might see one person show up multiple times. Graphite Studio also features heavily in this sketchbook. Their reference packs have more dramatic expressions and lighting, and a lot of these portraits here with a light hitting them from below are from the free Graphite Studio sample packs. But also there's random fan art, movie scenes, characters from games, just whatever caught my eye that day. Looking back through these shows a pretty accurate diary of my obsessions through that year and a half of drawing. The paper in this book, which was probably never intended as a sketchbook, is pretty terrible to draw on. the edges of each page were faded to yellow before I even started, and I also could never get them to lie flat. It's far from an ideal sketchbook, and somehow that made it easier. I was struggling so much back then, figuring out this art style, all the new things I learned about the shading and values and portraiture in general, and a messy old book felt like a safe environment to just figure things out. As I went on, more of these sketches were not just for practice per se, but studies for paintings. I started to get into acrylic painting that year, still learning basics of limited color palettes, and to make that process easier, I often sketched preliminary studies here with pencil or colored pencil, so that I could focus on the actual color mixing and brushwork for the painting, instead of figuring out the lighting and expression for the very first time. For a moment, I tried out green pencils, but really didn't get along with how those made my portraits here look automatically sickly. The goal for each of these pages, if I even had one, often varied. For this portrait here, I focused on delicate pencil shading over anything else, while others are more focused on capturing a likeness or expressive pencil strokes. Just going with the flow of what works best with the reference I picked that day. I really enjoy drawing studies of already stylized character portraits. Game art is a great resource for that, or animated movies. Seeing where an art style and your own natural tendencies clash or harmonize is fascinating. Here I also love how the shadow frames the profile, again emphasizing the planes of the face. While I rarely reached for regular erasers, for some of the pencil shading practice, I started to use kneaded erasers. They are great for toning down a cross-hatching texture that became overpowering, or for sculpting highlights. Whenever I drew from life, friends sitting around the same table as we chat, or at art markets, the lighting became much simpler. There's no elaborate setup after all, just a regular light bulb somewhere possibly, and there's constant movement. So these were always about facial proportions of the individual, trying to capture a likeness. I'd use a colored pencil to quickly capture an overall shape and position before someone changes the way they sit or face again, and then went over those with pencil as time went on. Art improvement isn't linear. We have off days, good days, we might be warmed up, or maybe we haven't drawn in a while. But also, I kept reaching for more challenging references as time went on. Unusual lighting or angles are more difficult to draw, but I wanted to make sure I didn't just keep on drawing young women in a three-quarter view, smiling softly and lit by ambient light. Now looking back, I still think I could have used some more diverse references, especially to represent a larger variety in age groups and a larger variety of expressions. These next few portraits show very clearly how often and when I sketched, mostly while watching movies or playing games. We were still socially distancing at the time and I was pretty sick, so I have to admit I pretty mindlessly played Magic the Gathering online, and whenever an opponent went MIA or took forever to finish their turn, I just sketched some more of the card art. MTG has an amazing roster of fantasy artists that I admire, creating art for them, and it was a fun way to pick a random character to doodle while waiting around. That autumn I was sketching a lot. I was really motivated to practice, everything was still so new and exciting to me, and I just tried to keep that momentum going. This is also when the Caran d'Ache Luminance Black came into my art supply collection, and it marks another technique shift that stuck around until today. The dark, intense shadows and beautiful pencil marks this colored pencil creates gave me so much energy. I liked to combine it with a warm brown tone, often a terracotta or Venetian red by Derwent Drawing. It gave the character portraits a less ghostly look than just a cool black shade on its own wood, and also made me look more at saturation as well as warm and cool areas on a portrait. But then I'd also go back to just simple studies of a face shape, something to doodle in a spare 10 minutes. More elaborate sketches don't always mean more practice. It's sometimes the simplest ones that teach me the most. There were, of course, ongoing struggles. I couldn't escape some of the elements I disliked in my portraits. The overly wide mouths, the often uneven eyes, and I did have to ask myself, what is my art style? Does it matter if I don't have a clear vision in these practice sketches? Can I just keep going like this, or should I try to create something more cohesive and more unique? Now, looking back, I'm glad I just kept going without overthinking it. Yes, these are just little portraits, often fan art, and some might think they don't have meaning or value as art. But I really think practice, repetition, and experimentation within media and themes are incredibly important if you actually want to improve your drawing and painting skills. Your practice doesn't have to be ambitious, stylistically cohesive. It can just be fun and a bit random. That way I actually stuck with it until the end. Here I practiced a more expressive face, something that is sorely lacking in this sketchbook, especially now that I flip back through it. I want to keep that in mind for my current sketches and practice and do more of these in the future. The next few portraits were calmer again, going back to neutral expressions. There are also the occasional portraits in here that I just don't really remember doing. I was sketching less in early winter with end-of-year deadlines looming and work invading every second of my free time, so most of this is a bit of a blur. Towards the middle and end of January, when I had more time again, sketching picked back up. It's when the Prismacolor Indigo Blue appears in my sketchbook practice for the first time. Such a great color, as it goes very dark but can also create very subtle shading, and I just love how it looks. I did a few master studies of oil paintings and love how this one here turned out. You can still see the guidelines for the face shape I drew. When drawing older people, it can be tempting to just slap on wrinkles, but I really try to follow the overall shapes and how they created highs and lows, concave and convex curves. You can tell from how many portraits I got done during this one here that I wasn't exactly glued to the screen, as the actual movie turned out to be quite mediocre, but I love how Bae Doona's portrait turned out, and she's one of my favorite Korean actresses. Sci-fi settings often have great, unique lighting choices for movie studies. The very next page turned out quite terrible in comparison, as I struggled capturing Gong Yu's face. I felt so sorry to him that I gave it another try here on the next page. Leaving out the actual head shape isn't always a good idea, as the position of a hairline, of an ear, or overall volume can give you guidelines that inform the facial features. But here, it somehow made it easier, and I really like how this one looks. Staying on the sci-fi side of things, I went to my favorite book series, though using the actors from the TV adaptation for comfort. Naomi Nagata here, also in that indigo blue, is one of my favorite characters in all of fiction. I used just a little bit of white colored pencil to blend out the indigo blue, creating hue shifts as colored pencils mixed with white often look quite different, and love how this one turned out. Nearly a month later, I had time to sketch again and continued with the Expanse characters. Bobby here is done all in that luminance black, which turned out to be really difficult as it's so intense and unforgiving. I much prefer it combined with softer colors. For Camina Drummer here, on the other hand, I used much subtler shading with a terracotta and pencil combination, and it's another one where I love how the nose turned out. I wish my noses were more consistent, as I struggle with painting them so much. I gave the pure luminance black another try for Ashford here, and again I struggled with how intense each line turned out. And I think that's when I started to mostly use that colored pencil for final shadows instead of overall portrait drawings. It's still good to give each material a try on its own at least once. This one here is a sketch I really love, done in Venetian red from the Derwent drawing line again, and just a hint of graphite pencil for details. I really like how Bilbo Baggins' expression turned out, but the uneven eyes are the bane of my existence even until today. Another time jump here. I have to admit I was sketching less regularly, at least in this particular sketchbook. At this point in time I'd really gotten into acrylic painting, and a lot of my art practice was focused on painting instead of sketching. Character art commissions, work for some tabletop companies, and even the occasional video game, though working digitally, and my sketchbook habit fell a bit to the wayside. That's not a bad thing. I think a lot of artists burn out. We can be too strict with ourselves, and I wanted this sketchbook to be a place of comfort, not annoyance or stress. I remember the next few pages very clearly as they were done on an over 30-hour-long trip, in airplanes, at airports, waiting for connecting flights, so the quality actually took quite a dip, and I was pretty frustrated with some of these. But again, improvement isn't linear, and sketching on a tiny, constantly shaking airplane table, or while very tired, probably doesn't bring out the best in anyone. I do want to give arcane characters another try in the future, as the art style is so much fun to play around with. There's another time jump here of even a few months, I think. I barely sketched after we returned from visiting family in Europe, busy catching up on work instead. I really like this drawing here though, when I finally got back to it, showing Lucifer from The Sandman. The reference had such a unique light and shadow setup that was fun to recreate here. I stuck with simple pencil sketches for a while, then brought back the terracotta graphite combo for a few House of the Dragon sketches. I really like how Viserys here turned out. I think it's rare that I really capture a likeness of someone, but this one just feels right to me, and I like the separation of more terracotta for the face, for liveliness, and more graphite for the metallic elements like the crown. Drawing profiles is really hard, and I always come back to them for practice and definitely need to do some more of these. This sketch here is another favorite, using the bright blue colored pencil that I started the sketchbook with and the later edition indigo blue together. This way I could separate shadows, midtones and highlights, just the paper, more clearly. A great technique for practicing values. This isn't an aesthetic sketchbook. The drawings in here aren't exciting to look at probably. No fancy techniques or fun colors or unique compositions. Just a quiet space to practice basics, slowly growing from page to page. Towards the end of the sketchbook, I tried to not fall into any kind of "these last pages have to be perfect" pitfalls. I just kept going with what I'd been doing and ended on a comforting, familiar note that winter, watching a movie while sketching for a cozy end to the sketchbook project. 82 portrait sketches, starting with mostly line drawings and slowly stepping into the world of shading, exploring values in different media, and I believe this small book made a big difference. Practice doesn't make perfect, but it sure makes better, and while I often felt like I wasn't improving, looking back now I can see how much this sketchbook helped me. One improvement you can't see in a sketchbook flip through: time. The farther we get in this sketchbook, the quicker my drawings were. I became less hesitant, quicker to sketch in large shapes and capturing a likeness. confident with different materials and shading approaches. And I think that's an aspect that can get lost if we just look at the final results. I kept sketching a variety of portraits in here, hopping from one material to the next, and while not all of these are good portraits, I did pick up little elements that I like from each of them. Maybe a way to shade curly hair, maybe a way of combining colors, maybe a new way of drawing eyes. After that sketchbook was complete, I didn't immediately start a new one focused on portraits. I did have this ongoing A5 sketchbook with a mixture of travel sketches, figure studies, my cat, and also the occasional portraits that I used a lot in 2023. The larger format, compared to the less than A6 portrait sketchbook I'd just finished, allowed for more variation here, and while I regret that I didn't keep my portrait practice going, the occasional master studies drawn in this one gave me time to reflect and branch out. So in a way I enjoyed having that break from just portraits, though they always pop up here and there. It's what I enjoy drawing the most, after all. I do want to attempt something like the 100 Heads challenge, but focusing on different media and giving myself time for exploration, as I don't feel excited about sketching 100 portraits in 10 days. That just sounds scary to me. And this sketch here marks the birth of this very YouTube channel. Here I layered a rainbow pencil over just two colored pencils, terracotta and black, to create more hue variety. And for this spread, I went back over the Lumi's portrait drawing method, something I had always vaguely at the back of my mind but didn't remember the details of. This spread shows something I want to do more of in 2025. Practicing individual elements of the face, like the eyes here, but I should really practice noses and mouths next. This spread here is the most recent one, as I drew over some older sketches of my cat who walked away mid-drawing. So this spread actually shows really well what warming up can do to your drawings. The first drawing on the bottom left was stiff and unwieldy, but as I was on a long phone call and just kept on sketching in the background, the sketches became looser and more expressive. Warming up doesn't always have to mean quick 30-second sketches, but just spending time shading a face or trying to capture the expression of an eye helps. So all of these were done during 1, maybe 2-hour phone call, as I was quite distracted, but still it shows improvement. Really, it's just me being warmed up at the end versus fresh out of bed and still very sleepy in the morning. If you ever feel like you're not good enough, or if you're frustrated with your progress, it might just be that you haven't given your eye, brain and hand time to connect. By now, I did start another purely portrait practice focused sketchbook. I missed having something small, something I can sketch in no matter where I am or what else is going on. While the first page has some thumbnail sketches for another painting idea, I then just naturally transitioned into portrait drawings again, as I was traveling to Seoul at that time. Instead of just portraits, I want to draw portraits in an environment. It's what I struggle with when painting them, after all, the relation between the character and the background and making those connected. So movie scenes are the perfect study material for that. Someone, or rather a whole team of someones, took time and care to light a scene, to create contrast and focus, and we can learn a lot from that artistic vision. Here I try to study how the values of the background relate and compare to Eowyn in the foreground. What is lighter? What is darker? Where do gradients happen? And how can I express a blurry background with more abstract pencil shading? I really like how this one turned out. For this scene study of Akashi, I brought in one cool and one warm colored pencil, expanding beyond just values. The face itself isn't as brightly lit as the background, which is the opposite of my own painting instincts, and thus quite challenging. For this scene from Dune, the harsh light was really fascinating. I tried to sketch clear shadow shapes here, and to capture that upturned face. I also tried to make the beard look natural instead of glued on, which is often an issue for me. The background is so overexposed that it fades to nearly nothing but light, and I sketched some guidelines with my Prismacolor terracotta to bring a hint of warmth to it. This isn't a movie scene but a painting master study, and I really dug into shadow shapes here. I also try to be more expressive in my pencil strokes and to contrast those with the detailed shading of her face. The next two portraits are from Midnight Mass, and Mike Flanagan always lights his scenes very dramatically. I sketched both of them on the go with colored pencils and then painted details on top with gouache. I showed a process for that in my previous art vlog. It's a new mixed media approach for me, trying to think in stages instead of finishing everything in one single go. The last few sketches are very simple but ended up being some of my favorites. I sketched all of these during one single long holiday dinner, chatting with both artist and non-artist friends that knew what to expect when they visit me. So I was a bit distracted and often just held the pencil in my hand for 30 minutes at a time without drawing anything. But I still wanted to get something done, as I hadn't drawn or painted anything except work stuff all week. I love this final portrait sketch of the year. Hannah Groves in another Mike Flanagan show that I love. Her actual eyes are even more doe-like and expressive than I could capture here, but I still really like how the shading turned out, from the facial planes shaded with a 0.3 mechanical pencil to the more expressive lines drawn with the black wing. This is a combination I definitely love and want to explore more. That's it, 3 years of portrait sketches. My sketchbooks never contain finished drawings, but are vehicles for practice. But I still try to inject some personality into those, find some style elements that I enjoy, and to draw what I love most. I hope you enjoyed this sketchbook tour, that you saw some kind of improvement, even if it was slow and had its ups and downs. If you want to practice along with me, I'll be posting more sketchbook sessions over the coming months, as this time of the year is when I feel the most motivated to practice, to huddle up in the warmth with a sketchbook, and before art markets and events take up my weekends again. Thank you so much for watching, and Happy New Year!